Hello. Hey everyone. Hey gamers. Hey chat. A bit late to the stream. Well, not just a bit, actually 2 hours. Sorry about that. I was busy with work and everything else in life in general. I've done with my meetings today, and tomorrow is just work as usual at the office. And I've been reading further into Nehisi quotes the message. Not that much actually, only about 40 pages. I was hoping I've gotten into page 100 or something by today, but job and everything kinda get in the way. I'm in the middle of chapter 2 on pharaohs. So in the message, Nehisi basically goes to 3 countries where he tried to trace history of oppression there, and for lack of a better term, I guess. The first country that he goes through, which is in chapter 2, because chapter 1 is just him introducing himself and how he was raised by his parent Paul, who is an ex-member, or maybe a member of the Black Panther Party in America, which is one of the first black liberal movement in America, which of course they killed along with any revolution in Cold War. And then he also went to Vietnam War, but he's one of the few veterans from there, or I guess it's not that rare maybe in Vietnam War, maybe it's rarer in Iraq War, but he's some of the first veterans that has voiced his regret at joining the war quote unquote, because he's aware that America is the bad guy on Vietnam War and on a lot of other wars that they are involved in, including Iraq War and of course the Israel-Palestine thing. So being raised by that kind of father kinda give him an advantage in recognizing those kind of oppression that usually the country is trying to hide by showing movies like American Sniper and a lot of other things, even Zero Dark 30, where they killed Osama bin Laden, which is genuinely a terrorist. They also shove in a lot of lies, and that's how Ta-Nehisi Coates was raised, and that's the whole first chapter is that, how he fell in love with journalism, how he fell in love with writing, how he fell in love with reading. And chapter 2 he goes to Africa, and then he went through the history of how race was invented, because it didn't just came out of nowhere, right? The concept of race. I know nowadays it's more normal. You see Chinese people like me, you call it Chinese, or Asian. You see white people, you call it American or British or whatever. And you see black people, you call them black. But the first time race was invented, most of them is pseudoscience. Most of them is just justification to that to make some justification of them doing horrible things more right, more legit. Phrenology, I think, is some of the most famous one that I will try to put in the video, which I don't think the book also has gotten that deep into. Phrenology, which is the study of not, I don't know how to call it a study, but it is kinda is the study, because even though it is just based on opinion, not anything that is scientific or has been peer reviewed or anything like that. Phrenology is how white people justifies looking at black people, brown people, or non-white people in general as not as smart as them, which makes little sense if you've seen what happened in history. And then there's eugenics, which the Nazi used to eliminate, so as a justification to eliminate the Semitic people, which is Jews, Arab, and I think there's more, but I don't remember. There's also the curve bell. Curve bell is not about race, but it is a bit. It took a bit of the. It took some part of eugenics and also phrenology, and it also have the same fight, same energy as them. So you know, those are all pseudoscience, and but Ta-Nehisi referred to it in his book is N-wordology, even though I think he should just use phrenology, because it doesn't just affect black people in the long-term use of the study, but it is his book, he's writing, and he want to make it personal, so he used other term for it, which fair enough. I'm going to start reading later from around page 42, but for now let's read some letters. Hey, jelly monster. sleeping, enter your game. Is a person. What? Necklace? Dog tag? Sanitation can just leave early or leave stuff for next shift to deal with. This week will be our share stuff. I should know this since I also work at a very busy office. That's all I have. Not really that much of an advice, but also I don't know what she's trying to ask here, or what he's trying to ask here. Okay, let's go into this book. So this is when the part where I'm reading is when Nehisi finally arrived at Africa and then made some friends I don't know if I should call them friends because he just met them, but people he can talk to anyway. It was time for lunch. Now alone, I found a restaurant comprised of two roughly appointed rooms. There was no real roof, save a kind of tarp put over the walls of the room for shade. I entered and stood apprehensively at the front of the first room. All the tables were occupied. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. I've always thought of myself as an anti-thrill seeker. I'm afraid of heights. I hate roller coaster. Gambling is lost on me, as are horror movies with their jump scares. But when I'm traveling, I live for these awkward moments. When I need something, in this case to eat, but I'm not quite sure how to get it. There is usually an easy way out. I felt a desire to retreat to something more familiar, something designed for the tourists, maybe back at a hotel, seated by that sad ocean. But I had been here before and now knew the big thrill of small victories, and so I waited until a waitress waved and pointed at a table where a man was finishing his meal. He nodded, and I sat. A few minutes later, he was gone. I managed to order in French and found myself facing a heaping plate of fish and jollof rice and a glass of sorrel. I looked around at all the people chattering with companions or eagerly eating in silence and felt the reward for pushing through a moment of uncertainty. I had, in a small way, perhaps through an anteroom, arrived. Back at the hotel after a nap, I got dressed for dinner. A fellow writer, having to end, was picking me up. As we drove up La Corniche, the sun started to set over the ocean and the temperature started to drop. In the cooling twilight, I saw packs of people running along the beach. Again, we passed the area on the beach filled with exercise equipment, but here at us it was bustling with men and women doing crunches, chin-ups, and dips. Beyond the machines, I saw soccer fields and basketball courts, all brimming with life. There was no disrepair or abandonment, there was only me and the notion that still haunted. We ate at a small, quiet restaurant in the coast. A line of pebble steps led from the dining area to the ocean. Again, my mind flashed back to the other side of this dark ocean, and I saw myself with a blue and yellow raft, and I felt something pulling me down to the water. And so I walked down the steps until I was right at the edge of the ocean. The water lapping against the stony shore, I bent down, and then I felt the water rush between fingers. A joy came with the cold of the wave, and I heard the ghost singing. I don't know if I've ever experienced a deeper sense of triumph in my life. I felt that I had somehow beaten history itself. I thought of all my exponential grandmothers taken from this side of the world and into the vast ocean. I thought of their frustrated dream of never getting back home. I thought of the home they tried to make on the other side despite it all. I carried a part of all of them with me, every one of them, and I had come back. Looking out on that rocky beach, I felt the whole of the land speaks to me, and it said, "What took you so long?" What indeed? This is about the forest again, about the limits of genius, about the need to walk the land as opposed to intuit and hypothesize from the edge. There are dimensions in your words, rhythm, concept, shape, feelings, and so too with the world outside. The accretion of imperfect, discomfiting life must be seen and felt so that the space in your mind, gray, automatic, and square, fills with angle, color, and curve. The potholes, the dented fenders, the fried bread, the walls of fabric, the heaping plate of rice and fish. But the color is not just in the physical world you observe, but in the unique interaction between that world and your consciousness. In your interpretation, your subjectivity, the things you notice in yourself. My own surprise at, say, African jogging on the beach or dilapidated gym revealing itself as a beautiful example of civic spirit, say something important about the world I was trying to describe, but also about me, my fears, and my thoughts. That's cute. The next day I was back by the sea for lunch. I was developing a ritual wherein, even when I was alone, I took a few moments of solemn meditation. The day was perfect, hot as usual, but already the African in me was emerging. It took the form of comprehension of the virtue of shade and moving slow. I came out of my meditation and ordered a plate of fish yassa, rice, and plantains. Then I watched as a group of boys on longboards paddled out into the ocean, waited for a righteous wave, mounted, and surfed back in. I see them now in my mind, lanky and long, their spider arms waving in the air, their young courage heedless of the nearby rocks. Black Americans who have traveled to Senegal will often remark on the beauty of the people. They mean this physically, that the people of Senegal are some of the most striking they've ever seen. And it's true, they are beautiful. I had to work extremely hard not to stare. Even my server that day, with her dreadlocks curling around her head like a crown, was striking in all the ways we are told to think we are not. Everywhere I went in Dakar, I was amazed, too amazed, I think. The remarking on Senegalese beauty, the tone of it, betrays a deep insecurity, a shock that the deepest and blackest part of us is really beautiful. And this too is the shade of wordology. For Africa, it's not just geographic origin of our ordeal, it is the anchor of the idea, the warrant that justified the ordeal. America's master race practiced, in their words, African slavery. When they went to war to save this institution, they went with a story on their lips and a warrant in their hand. Slavery must endure, and the races must be separated to save their wives and daughters from pollution and violation on account of the loss of half-civilized Africans. Before that war, they had already transfigured slaveholding into the word of God, which sought to save the African coming from a barbarous state and from a tropical climate, and transform these captives into the happiest set of people on the face of the globe. Teddy Roosevelt, reporting on his voyage to Africa, described a continent of ape-like savages, whose brightest light had only advanced to the upper stage of barbarism, and had thus developed a very primitive kind of semi-civilization. It was not narrow prejudice that Roosevelt wielded, but something broader, a story that would make his reader understand that progress and development in this particular kind of new land depends exclusively upon the masterful leadership of the whites. And from this foundational notion of ape-like man, half-civilized African, and tropical barbarians, the cinematic universe of Envirology follows the gold dust twin, corn king cereal, and warheads, and warhair tobacco, Sambu, and Gopens, and Jemima, and Marse Chan, icons meant to denigrate our world and elevate theirs. I'm thinking of Toni Morrison Pauline about to give birth to a black girl. I'm thinking of her escape into the movies, into the stories. There in the dark, her memory was refreshed, and she succumbed to her earlier dreams, along with the idea of romantic love. She was introduced to another, physical beauty, probably the most destructive idea in the history of human thought. Both originated in envy, thrived in insecurity, and ended in delusion. In equating physical beauty with virtue, she stripped her mind, bound it, and collected self-contempt by the hip. I'm thinking of Pauline voicing the fertility in this escape. I remember one time I went to see Clark Gable and Jane Harlow. I fixed my hair up like I'd seen hers on a magazine, a part on the side with one little curl on my forehead. It looks just like her. Well, almost just like. Anyway, I sat in that show with my hair done up that way and had a good time. I thought I'd see it through to the end again, and I got up to get me some candy. I was sitting back in my seat and I'd taken a big bite on that candy, and it pulled a tooth right out of my mouth. I could have cried. I had good teeth, not a rotten one in my head. I don't believe I ever did get over that. There I was, 5 months pregnant, trying to look like Jean Harlow, and a front tooth gone. Everything went then. Looks like I just didn't care no more after that. I let my hair go back, plaited it up, and settled down to just being ugly. Morrison presents a black woman aspiring to white beauty, but not just a fake, abstract white beauty. Jane Harlow is the anchor for Morrison's claim that physical beauty is probably the most destructive idea in the history of human thought. It is a grand pronouncement made grander by use of contrast. The superlative, most destructive, enhanced by the chancy, probably like sea salt over dark chocolate. Morrison's probably is irony, an understatement that understates nothing. But what grounds this idea is the specificity of how they land in the life of Pauline, the particulars of her story and language, the part and fur in her hair, the candy breaking her tooth, the pregnancy, and the simple devastating declaration, everything went down. Here is a woman whose condition is defined by a Jim Crow order, defined still further by a Jim Crow story. A little black girl yearns for the blue eyes of little white girl, and the horror at the heart of her yearning is exceeded only by the evil of fulfillment. The next night I was back out with Hamidel and his wife Kanata at the same outdoor restaurant with the pebble steps leading down to the water. I walked in the darkness and went through my new meditation ritual, this time reaching down and letting the water lap into my hand. Then I walked back up and took a seat with my host. I ordered a beer. The ocean was now only visible when the thundering wave crashed white against the rock. My distant dream of Africa was fading as I sat there across from two Africans, two individuals who I had come to like very much as people, their ease, their humor. We were linked by related traumas of colonialism and enslavement, but even now I am wondering what was there and what I projected, and whether this feeling of having tracked down long-lost siblings was real or imagined. On that count, we set up for humor, joking about how most African was never live under the one-drop rule, see African Americans. The lines were blurry. LeBron James was black, Beyonce was mixed despite having two black parents by the American definition. Her husband Jay-Z was black because he was a rapper and not a singer. Likewise, Steph Curry, two black parents notwithstanding, would be mixed, but he played basketball and so was black. His wife though, she was mixed. And what of me? You're mixed, Nehisi? Kanata replied, laughing. Look, I understand what black is in America. I get that you're black there. But here you are mixed. That's how we see most black Americans. I don't know what it says about me that I just sip my beer and laugh. Maybe I was saying my own gospel. The social construction of race, so dispassionately preached back at me. Maybe I was thinking back to my black American friends and a lot of jokes about DNA tests and who is 100% African, none of us, and who is not. And then the humor faded. Kanata pointed out that in Senegal, this mixed looks is treasured. Black Americans are seen as cool, glamorous, and even beautiful because we are mixed. And many of the Senegalese women take steps from straightening hair to lightening skin to get that black American mixed look. This did surprise me. The one-drop rule had shaped us and then reached across the ocean to shape them, so that even here in Senegal, Pauline was pining for Jean Harlow. Except that Jean Harlow was us, and as I sat there with my lost sibling, listening to Kanata, it's so sad. It occurred to me that the mixed looks they treasure here is itself a marker of the ordeal, an inheritance of the mess wrap that shadows all those DNA jokes I make with my friends. The valuing of light skin was obviously not new to me as a black American, but to encounter the idea here, to know that even back home, Pauline would not be safe, was chilling. I had come back to the origin point of all of us to see my lost siblings. The ones who had evaded jail and slavery, but of course, the Warren had gotten there first. That was so sad. The next morning I got up early and headed for the 7 a.m. shuttle that would ferry me from the mainland to the Isle of Gore. I was told that the early shuttle would afford me the luxury of being in the company of a few tourists as possible. The sun was not up yet. The air was cool. I almost missed the boat because I had left my phone in my room. My driver had to rush me back to the hotel and then turn around and rush off again to the harbor. I got there just in time for the man working the boat to hustle me on board. I made a few off-color jokes to myself about the last time a group of African had hustled my people on the boat. I guess I should say that this sense of Dakar as any kind of origin point for Black America is itself a story, an invention. The invention is a collective one, an origin imagined and dreamed up to fill an emptiness of a people told that they come from nothing and thus have done nothing and thus are nothing. Gore and his alleged door of no return feel that near, a perfectly crafted pack for the hole in our story. But by now it was well established that very few of the reported millions of enslaved people passed through that door. I knew all that. But here again, no amount of scholarship could have stopped me from feeling what I felt at that moment as the boat pulled away from the coast of Africa, away from home. There was nothing particularly romantic about the waters between the mainland of Senegal and the isle just off its coast. I saw big ships, tankers maybe, some in apparent disrepair or abandoned, but it was clear, beautiful. It was a clear, beautiful morning. There were only a few other passengers aboard our ferry. I walked up to the boat's second level where I could be alone with the sea, and then I saw it, breaking from behind the industrial ships, a bright island dotted with houses of all kinds of colors and fronted by a stony fort, Gori. Every year, a group of activists descends on Alabama to replay the civil rights movement's most famous set piece of martyrdom, Bloody Sunday and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I never quite saw the point of this ritual replay of trauma, but standing on the deck of that boat, approaching the island, I finally understood it is a pilgrimage. And now, approaching Gori, I was a pilgrim on an ancestral journey back to the beginning of time, not just to my own birth, but to the birth of the modern world. The island was quiet, save the few residents walking along the coast. The shop near the dock were all closed. A lone woman watched us disembark and approached to say to me in perfect English that she had a shop nearby, giving the impression that she fully expected to see me before I finished my trip. I laughed and walked on. Another gentleman approached and offered to show me around. I declined and was glad I did. By then I was overrun by thoughts and emotions, and I really needed to filter through them, to understand them. And I felt the standard tour guides at many important places could only get in the way of the feelings I was having in this moment. A moment I never thought I ever needed. I walked south down a cobblestone road, listening to the birds bleating and roosters crowing in the distance. I felt a deep calm, and then at the end of the street, I found a hill and climbed it. And from that vantage point, I looked out at the sea. I saw the wave crashing, and the familiar sadness that I'd felt that entire trip. Every time I looked out into the sea came over me again. In my mind, I was traveling across an epic dating back some 500 years, when the first of us were carried off. Entire worldview, systems of study, political movements, wars, and literature were birthed by that one act, and such deep suffering. Standing on that hill, I felt it all personally. My mind returned to Baltimore, to the sketch, to my father trying to read his way out. The moment was broken by the island flag. I guess I was going to get a tour whether I liked it or not. I accepted this time, allowing the experience to happen to me, conceding that the experience was not just mine. I slid him some CFA when we were done, and then went to visit a woman at the market to buy some wares. On the way back from Gori, as the shuttle broke through the waves for the first time, I was stunned to find tears welling in my eyes. I felt ridiculous. Gori was a mythical site of departure, but still it had gotten hold of me. I know what I have said to you, against giving meaning to such considerations, against sentiment divorced from evidence, against a word that escaped footnotes. It's actually embarrassing that dates back to my time at Howard in Douglas Hall, where my history professor would send me to scholarly journal and monograph in the stack, and two in the wider community in DC beyond Howard, where I found that same spirit of skepticism in the irascible poets who schooled me, who loved only one thing more than writing, and that was arguing. And then I found it again in journalism, with editors who believed that whatever magic there was in our writing was generated by the street we walked, the quotes we took down and jacked and appended to real names on the records, and I got it from my father. There were elders in my ward who took to nationalism as religion, which is to say a set of answers for both their politics and their lives. But my dad could not be pinned down. He was skeptical and irreverent, and like his patron saying, Malcolm X, searching, always searching. That patented move of his, the one he pulled when I was still grappling with very stingly, where he led me back into the library and let the books talk for him, reflected his deepest faith. The answer to everything was in a book, he believed, which is to say, in the record. I think back to that sketch of him. A couple of months later, he will be in college, and a few years after that, he will be working as a research librarian. He's in his 70s now, but you can still find him sitting in his chair with a book, searching, trying to learn. A few weeks after I got back, he called me. He just finished a history of the rebellion of the enslaved in 18th century Guyana. He loved the book but was pained by how the rebellion concluded, not just in defeat, but with its leader turning on each other as ultimately collaborating with the very people who had enslaved them. He sighed as he recounted it to me and said, I don't think we are going to get back to Africa. My father did not mean this physically. He meant the Africa of our imagination, that glorious Eden we conjured up as exiles, a place without the Mayflower, founding fathers, conquistador, and the assorted corruption they had imposed on us. That Africa could no longer even be supported in his imagination because the corruption was not imposed at all but was in us, was part of the very humanity that had been denied us. That is where his skeptical searching landed him, not on the shore of a lost utopia but in the cold fact of human liability. And yet here I was, on this boat from Gori, my eyes welling up, grieving for something. The grips of some feeling I am still, even as I write this, struggling to name. Here is what I think. We have a right to our imagined tradition, to our imagined places, and those traditions and places are most powerful when we confess that they are imagined. Gori is the name of a place my people have proclaimed as sacred, a symbol representation of our last stop before the genocide and rebirth of the Middle Passage, before, as Robert Hayden once wrote, or voyage through death to life upon these shores. We have a right to that memory, to choose the rock of Gori, to consecrate it, to try before it, to read more in its meaning, and we have a right to imagine ourselves as Pharaoh, and then again the responsibility to ask if a Pharaoh is even worthy of our needs, our dreams, or imagination. I went to Senegal in silence and solitude, like a man visiting the grave of an uncertain ancestor. Beside Hamidou, Kanata, and their darling kids, I have spent my trip alone, walking and wandering, grieving and marveling. So that the Dakar I saw was not so much a city of people, but, like Gori itself, a monument at the last stop before we were remade. It occurs to me now that I had come to see a part of Africa, but not Africans. Indeed, almost every encounter I had with actual people found me, as I was back at Gori, seeking out the solace of my own reflection. Toward the end of my trip, the limits of this approach were becoming clear. I began to feel there was something deeply curious in the approach of a man who insists on walking through the rooms of his childhood home to commune with ghosts, heedless of the people making their home there now. So on my last night, Hamidou and Kanata organized a group of activists and writers to come together. I admit, I did not know what to expect of myself or them. We sat in a circle drinking tea and eating pastel. We went around the circle introducing ourselves in French. I managed about half the meeting before my brain tired out and had to switch in English. But there was no building from the group. Everyone smiled. They were my kind of people. Activists against the corruption of the state, writers delving into rising homophobia, but there was something more. We are black people, here and there, victims of the West. A people held just outside its liberal declaration, but kept close enough to be enchanted with its promises. We knew the beauty of this house, its limestone tap, its wainscoting, its marble beds, but more, we know that the house is haunted, that there is blood in the bricks and puss in the attic. We know that there is both tragedy and comedy in this condition, our own lives and culture, our music, our dance, our writing. We're all crafted in this absurd space beyond the walls of civilization. This is our collective power. All classes of people under social pressure are permeated with a common experience. We are emotionally welded as others cannot be. With them, even ordinary living has epic depth and lyric intensity. And this, their material handicap, is their spiritual advantage. So in a day when art has run to classes, cliques, and coteries, and life lacks more and more of a vital common background, The Negro artist, out of the depths of his group and personal experience, has to his hand almost the condition of a classical art. Or on Alain Locke, the great curator of the Harlem Renaissance, called his position or spiritual advantage. But I like the phrase he used a paragraph later, or vast spiritual endowment from which our best development have come and must come. I find the highest meaning in communing with those with whom the endowment is shared, with those who will comprehend the fire that sets our world light. That last night sitting there, I was a writer surrounded by people who do know the fire. They did not need to have the hypocrisies, the lies, the N-wordology explained. I knew slavery and Jim Crow, and they knew conquest and colonialism. And we were joined by an inescapable act, the first word written on the warrant of plunder in Africa. Someday, there will be more, and I guess there already is. In Afrobeats and Amapiano, and I guess there always was. In jazz and a ritual of depth, and the lines are bending in amazing ways. I know what I say about clarity, about mapping the shape and content of the words to feeling, but I confess that I have not yet found the words to capture the linkage. Halfway through our meeting, a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, joined the party. I was sitting in a circle, fielding questions. She stood at the edge of the circle with a look of amazement on her face. She took a seat next to me. I answered a few more questions about the group, and then she raised her hand and asked her own. She introduced herself as Biguega and told me she was a grad student at JK and at Diop University working on dissertation about my books. I'm sure she asked a question, but I don't remember it. No, the amazement was my own. There I was on the other side among family divided from each other by centuries. I had come back, but my own writing had gotten here first. That's amazing. That's the part with Africa. I want to skip chapter 3 and go to chapter 4, the gigantic dream. But first, let me drink, let me read some letters, let me raise my voice. good. And he can die when it's very lonely. Okay, I don't know how to read that. Let's see if Google Translate can help. Let's see what you contain the love of someone. Okay. Yeah. Really tired. Okay, I want to read the fourth. There it is. This book is written already. What is this book published? First published in 2024. Okay. So this is the fourth chapter, the gigantic dream, opened by a quote from Nora Erakat. We have all been lied to about too much. On the last day of my trip to Palestine, I visited Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. I don't know that I've ever seen a more striking sight of mourning. It was late May. The weather in Lebanon is dry and warm. Here, as at Gori, I refuse to guide the door, preferring to wander this complex, this building, momentums, and landscape grounds in the company of my own impressions. I begin by walking into a large building with ivory walls, where I found myself facing the massive Book of Names, 70 separate tomes stretching almost the entire length of the 8-meter long hall that contains it, holding some 17,500 pages, each the head of an adult human being, and on those pages are the names of nearly 5 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. I slowly rounded the length of the book, thumbing through the pages, pausing from time to time, until I had circumnavigated the entire cataclysm. I was barely 20 minutes into my visit, and already I felt the need to rest. I sat down on a nearby bench, falling into a kind of thoughtless reflection, wherein I felt but did not speak, even to myself. The human mind can only conceive of so much tragedy at once, and when lost lives spiral into the hundreds, then thousands, then millions, when murder becomes a wide, seemingly unending mess, we lose our ability to see its victim as anything more than an abstract, almost theoretical, collection of lives. In this way, a second crime is perpetrated. Human beings are reduced to a cruel of misery. At Yad Vashem, the sheer enormity of the book mirrors the breadth of the crime it records, but the names, each one clearly inscribed, stand out against the mess of the thing, like stars dotting the night. In this sense, the Book of Names does exactly what we writers seek to do. It clarifies. I sat on the bench watching as a young couple, speaking French to each other, flipped through the book searching for the name of a lost relative. Then I stood up and left that ivory-walled room and walked down the avenue of the righteous among the nations, a long outer space dedicated to the Gentiles who risked their life on behalf of the Jews hunted by Hitler. At the end of the avenue, I entered Yad Vashem Holocaust History Museum. I've walked the spiraling halls of the National Museum of African American History, a journey that begins in the depth of a slave ship. I've been to the Whitney Plantation in New Orleans, which does not center itself on Southern bellies and mint juleps, but on the system of forced labor that bound, worked, and whipped human beings within an inch of their lives and beyond. I've stood before the earthworks at the wilderness in Virginia, where men were burned alive in a war to uphold that same system. That America gives more attention to the genocides abroad than to the genocide at home might fool you into quasi-denialism, where you might think the Holocaust evils are exaggerated for effect. This is wrong. Every time I visit a space of memory dedicated to this particular catastrophe, what I always come away thinking is that it was worse than I thought, worse than I could ever imagine, and Yad Vashem was no exception. I entered the main building and confronted a long college of home movies taken in the years when that technology was still new. Fragmented footage of Jewish universe bending towards justice. I saw the connection made right there at Yad Vashem in one of its last exhibits. A black and white reel of David Ben-Gurion declaration the creation of the Israeli state. This arc from Holocaust to nation state has been retraced in film, literature, and global memory. The relentless grimness of Schindler's List finds its relief in the unwanted wandering Jews saved by Schindlers, finding a home in their promised land, while Jerusalem of gold plays in the background. In this way, the one of relief can be permanently settled. 2,000 years of wrong has at last been righted, and a people persecuted, hunted, and subjected to industrialized genocide has not been survived but found its way back to a God-given home. Home, with all its implication of safety, warmth, and family, is only half of Israel's national story. It is not just that Jewish people were finally left to cultivate their own promised land, free from the terror of Gentiles, but upon that promised land they erected a Jewish state, which is to say the Jewish nation cleaved to an official Jewish flag, an official Jewish language, an official Jewish army, and what that meant was not just freedom, but power. After mass murder in Rhineland, after all civilization has abandoned them to the gas chamber, after Dreyfus and Shylock, after expulsion from Spain, after 2,000 years of depredations, the Jewish people have taken their place among the strong. The shape of the story is not just the carving out of justice, but something more, a perfect circle, not merely a writing, but a restoration, a redemption. And this redemption was evident the moment I entered Yad Vashem, because the first thing I saw there was not an exhibit, but a row of 20-odd soldiers in fatigues, carrying guns the size of small children. And they were almost children themselves, barely out of high school by their appearance, and engaged in some kind of banter known only to them. I stood there staring, probably longer than I should have. There was something incongruous about so many guns being so flagrantly wielded in so solemn a place. I knew that they were there to protect this site from those who would wish Hitler's work more complete, but by then I knew that was not all the soldiers his country were protecting. On my first full day in Jerusalem, I walked with a group of fellow writers, editors, and artists into the old city of Jerusalem. We were staying in East Jerusalem, which has been under Israeli occupation, along with the West Bank and Gaza since 1967. There were about a dozen of us total, all from all over the world: South Africa, Kashmir, the UK, and America, at the invitation of the Palestine Festival of Literature. For 5 days, our host took us from city to city so that we might see Palestine from the ground. The sun hung big and brilliant in a cloudless open sky, but the air was relatively cool. Our group of companions walked to the brink of the Lion's Gate, where we met with custodian of one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa complex, which includes the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. This was the object of our visit, but it was made difficult by the filing of soldiers who examined our passport and then, for no discernible reason, made us wait. The land of the Al-Aqsa complex is holy to both Muslims and Jews. Muslims believe that Al-Aqsa is where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Jewish people have a different name for the Al-Aqsa complex, the Temple Mount, hallowed ground that derives its power from an alloy of collective legend, collective biography, and historical fact. All three Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, believe Temple Mount to be the site of a temple built by the biblical King Solomon. Beyond faith, Temple Mount is also the site of King Herod's temple, and while archaeological site evidence for Solomon's temple is scant, the existence of the King Herod's temple is settled fact. And then there is prophecy, for it is held by some of its believers that a third temple will someday be erected at Temple Mount, thus heralding the coming of the Messiah. The western wall at the edge of Al-Aqsa is at that remains of Herod's temple, and is also the area allotted for Jews to worship under agreement called the status quo, which divides the old city into separate worship zones for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Modern Jerusalem itself is divided between East and West. The former, mostly populated by Palestinians and later by Israelis, advocates of a two-state solution have long imagined West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine state. The old city is in East Jerusalem, and for the moment, a Jordanian-funded WAF exercise nominal control of Al-Aqsa. But the real control belongs to the occupying power, with predictable result. Israelis regularly tour Al-Aqsa, while Palestinians are barred from the Western Wall. We stood at Lion's Gate for the next 45 minutes or so, talking among ourselves, unsure of what was happening or why we had been stopped. Was it that we had camera? Was it that our guide was Jordanian? No justification were given, no question asked, no instruction offered. The soldiers just stood there with their enormous guns blocking the way. I leaned against a nearby wall and watched as a group of tourists streamed in and out of the gate, unmolested and unquestioned. But no one visibly Muslim passed through the Lion's Gate in all the time we were made to wait. I could not quite put words to what I was seeing, but watching those soldiers stand there and steal our time, the sun glinting off their shade like Georgia sheriffs, I could feel the lens of my mind curving to retract the blur of new and strange events. The next day I was with the same group, walking through the old city of Hebron with Walid Abu al-Halawa, a local urbanist. Al-Halawa, in tinted glasses, dark jeans, and a long-sleeved green shirt, explained that when he was a child, this city had been open and bustling, with a thriving market and streams of pilgrims coming to visit Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi, which is traditionally believed to be the burial ground of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob. But as in the old city, Israeli soldiers exercised total control over all movement through the town. We were standing at the gate to Al-Shuhada Street, which was once the main market street of Old Hebron. Palestinians are now barred from Al-Shuhada Street, while settlers move as they please through the whole town. There are 126 Israeli cameras filming and recording the whole way there. Walid said, then he pointed towards rooftop after rooftop and said, "There's a camera there, a camera over there, a camera there." The city's most visible feature was its amazing variety of checkpoints. Some of them were just soldiers lingering around. Other massive gates with metal turnstiles. As we approached one, I watched two Palestinian school children being stopped by a soldier and directed back down the street from which they had come. And then it was our turn. One by one we approached. They checked our passport and allowed us to proceed. The soldiers ran as they feel, stopping and interrogating according to their whim. Later that day, I walked out to buy some goods from a shopkeeper. Before I could get there, a soldier walked out from checkpoint, blocked my path, and asked me to state my religion. He looked at me skeptically when I told him I did not have one and asked for my parents' religions. When I told him they were not religious either, he rolled his eyes and asked about my grandparents. When I told him they were Christian, he allowed me to pass. If this had happened in America, I would have told you that the soldier who stopped me was black, and I guess he was here too. In fact, there were black soldiers everywhere holding their power over the Palestinians, many of whom would in America have been seen as white. Again, I felt the mental lens curving against the light and was reminded of something I have long known, something I've written and spoken about, but still was stunned to see here in such stark detail. That race is a species of power and nothing else. And I knew here, in this moment, how I would have fallen in the hierarchy of power if I had told that black soldier that I was a Muslim. And on that street so far from home, I suddenly felt that I had traveled through the time as much as through space. For as sure as my ancestors were born into a country where none of them was the equal of any white man, Israel was revealing itself to be a country where no Palestinian is ever the equal of any Jewish person anywhere. This fact is not hard to discern. Beyond my own initial impression, there is the law itself, which clearly and directly calls for a two-tier society. Jewish citizens of Israel who marry Christian from Scotland can pass their citizenship to their spouse and children. Palestinian citizens of Israel cannot. Jewish Israel in Jerusalem are citizens of the state. Palestinians in the city are merely permanent residents, a kind of sub-citizen with a reduced set of rights and privileges. In Hebron, Jewish settlers are subject to civil law without its rights and protections, while stateless Palestinians in the same city are subject to military courts with all their summary power and skepticism. The separate and unequal nature of Israeli rule is both intense and omnipresent, something I saw directly. The road and highways we traveled were marked off for a license plate of different colors. Yellow used mostly by those who are Jewish, and white with green lettering used almost entirely by those who are not. As we drove this road along the West Bank, our guide pointed out settlements, a word that I had always taken to refer to rock camps staked out in the desert, but in fact, the settlements are more akin to American subdivisions, distinguished from the villages of the Palestinians by homes with large red roofs, as surely as a white picket fence denoted the suburb of 20th century America and not its teeming cities. On many of the Palestinian roofs, I saw large cisterns for the harvesting of rainwater. These systems were almost certainly illegal. The Israeli state's hold on the West Bank includes control of the aquifers in the ground and the rainwater that falls from above. Any structure designed for gathering water requires a permit from the occupying power, and such permits are rarely given to Palestinians. It has been updated now. Israeli did not just reject, rarely given the permission, but never. It is now entirely forbidden for Palestinians in the West Bank to build anything, because they want to take over West Bank since a long time. That has been their target, and that hasn't changed. That's why That's why permission for building anything is no longer given. The upshot is predictable. Water consumption for Israelis is nearly 4 times that of Palestinians living under occupation. And in those West Bank settlements, which I once took as mere outposts, you can find country clubs furnished with large swimming pools. On seeing this system, it occurred to me that Israel had advanced beyond the Jim Crow South and segregated not just the pools and fountains, but the water itself. And more, it occurred to me that there was still one place on the planet under American patronage that resembled the world that my parents were born into. And I was in that world. Even as I walked haltingly through Yad Vashem, which is among other things a grand narrative of conquered ancestors built by their conquering progeny, I can see that, now that I have walked the land, there was a time when I took my survey from afar and invoked this same land to service my own, more narrow story. It hurts to tell you this. It hurts to know that in my own writing I have done to people that which in this writing I have been vague against, that I have reduced people, diminished people, erased people. I want to tell you I was wrong. I want to tell you that your oppression will not save you, that being a victim will not enlighten you, that it can just easily deceive you. I learned that here, in Haifa, in Ramallah, and especially here at Yad Vashem. So this is another story about writing, about power, about settling accounts. A story not of redemption, but of reparation. When I think of my earliest day as a writer, what I recall is a kind of longing. I felt everything I wished to say, even if I didn't exactly know it. There was so much I did not understand, and what I did understand, I could never say with all the layers and color that would truly convey the understanding to my reader. I would fall in love with some girl and find my emotions so dominated that the only fan I had was writing it down. But when I pulled out my black and white composition notebook and put pen to paper, what I saw instead were the words of 1,000 other men who had gone before me. I had no voice, which is to say, no cadence, no lexicon, no sense of beauty I could call my own. I would stay up late, reading Etheridge's Night as You Leave Me over and over, wondering how the hell he did it. What does it mean to watch a woman you love disappear into the dark street, to whistle and smile at the Jones? I was so young. I knew what it was to want one way and to be wanted in another, but not like this, not with a woman who went out to whistle and smile at the Jones. That phrase was such an elegant description of sex works that I think that even if Etheridge himself had never had the experience, he knew enough about life to make us feel like he had. There was a lesson for me in that. I know there are writers who can imagine a world from nothing, but I am not one of them. The sense of beauty I was seeking had to emerge from knowledge. 10 years ago, I acquired the sense that all of the skill and techniques I have discussed with you the beauty inherent in the feel and rhythm of words, the great import of direct reporting and deep research, the force of active and intentional language, the power of tense, the gravity of history, was at last in my clutches. I did not think myself a master of this entire arsenal, but I felt that I well understood its uses. And more, I had shockingly to me found myself writing for The Atlantic, a storied magazine with a resource so good and strengthened my writing. This was crucial. I traced myself back to a line of autodidact writers, men and women who felt themselves in possession of some essential truth, but were forced to decipher that truth without fact-checkers, copy editors, and access to distant archive and expensive databases to perfect their testimony. But I now had those tools, and I understood that whatever power I now felt I possessed as a writer, the amplifying force of the institution around me was indispensable. All this I brought to bear at length in an essay for The Atlantic, The Case for Reparation. As I wrote, I could feel it flowing through me. All the study of language, all the reading, all the reporting, all of it coming together in what felt to me like a dissertation with an audience of one. That sounds crazy, I know, but in the months before the article was published, I felt that I had at last discovered the answer to the haunting question of why my people so reliably settled at the bottom of nearly every socio-economic indicator. The answer was simple. The persistence of our want was matched exactly to the persistence of our plunder. I was blessed with a gift, and the gift was not simply the knowledge that they were lying about us, about this country, and about themselves, but the proof, the studies, monograph, and my own reporting. And I had an institution that vouched for the validity of this exercise, which put its weight and cloud behind it. I guess it's odd for me, who preaches the power of writing, to tell you this, but I was shocked by everything that came of that union. I had set my psyche relatively low, to synthesize the scholarship and journalism in some dynamic and gripping fashion, to make political writing into an art. As Orwell had implored, so that the idea of reparation, the notion that we had been robbed and must be repaid, would no longer be so easily laughed at by the robbers. Maybe that was my mistake. Making a charge according to the law of those you indict is a dangerous business. However much you try to remember your own motives, however much you may feel yourself to have succeeded, you are ultimately in their world and are thus compelled to speak to them through their symbols and stories. The need is even greater when you are a stranger to them, an adversary even, because your claims are always viewed with more skepticism. I live in a world of white editors and white writers. I respected and admired many of them professionally, and considered some of them friends. This was mutual. There were very few places that I felt were more open to my resourcing and cultivating my writing and imagination than The Atlantic. I think now I felt grateful even to have the chance to publish what I considered so radical a proposition on the cover of such a hallowed and lauded magazine. But I also felt that I was attempting to display the truth and gravity of the depth of white supremacy for people who did not understand intuitively, and who would have great difficulty ever imagining that debt being repaid. And so, to make the case, I reached for the same story invoked by Yad Vashem, The Perfect Circle, from Holocaust to state, and Germany's effort to pay off its own inconceivable debt by making reparations to the state of Israel. I had then a vague notion of Israel as a country that was doing something deeply unfair to the Palestinian people, though I was not clear on exactly what. And I knew there was a long history of alliances between Palestinian freedom fighter and the radical black activists to whom I traced my own roots. I remember watching World News Tonight with my father and deriving from him a notion that the Israelis were white and the Palestinians were black, which is to say that the former were the oppressor and the latter the oppressed. And once, back when I dreamed of being a poet, my father had handed me a book by the Palestinian-American poet Zuhair Muhammad titled Born Palestinian, Born Black, and this combination felt natural to me, though I could not have then articulated why. What I had was a human instinct that a grave injustice was being imposed on the Palestinian, one that likely dates back to the vindication skepticism of America and what I perceived as whiteness. But I became a journalist just at the moment that I began to feel. me take a little bit of break. So that was him in traveling through Israel and Palestine, Gaza and West Bank, because Haifa and Ramallah are both in West Bank and is part of the apartheid state of Israel. Palestinian was placed into like a second-hand citizen there. Not second-hand, but a sub, less than the Israelis, than the Jews there. As the book mentioned, there is plate numbers for the Israel, which is, I think, is green, if I don't misremember it, and for the others, for all Palestinian is white, and for some expats and others, they can be both white or green, depends on mostly your religion, as Nehisi has noticed. And then the guard in the outpost just can stop people and reject them based on their whim, because there's really no good reasoning for them to reject people to enter the city. Sometimes in those border, the people that have to come in is students, kids, children, because school is not allowed to be built in West Bank, and any, as I mentioned, even housing and place to collect water is, and also electricity is not allowed to be built. So school is also one of those that is not allowed to be built. As a result, every student had to go through the gates. Each time, every day, they have to go to school, and oftentimes they are not allowed to go into school just because the guard just doesn't feel like doing that. And oftentimes, the guard also make the line go so long just because they feel like doing that. That's been normalized so much. It's bullying behavior. It's encouraged bullying behavior. A lot of harm came from that, mostly to women, because one, often women got lost during the forceful stopping and then was forced to take off their clothing, and sometimes they do more. Sometimes the woman just never appeared again to their family. They got kidnapped, they got disappeared. Men also, it also happened to men, so it's not just women, but a higher percentage of it is to the Palestinian woman. And then beside those cases, there are also times where pregnant Palestinian had to deliver, but the hospital is across the border, because hospital is also not allowed to be built. So often when a Palestinian pregnant mother had to deliver their baby, they had to go through the border, and often those border can be so long that some mothers have had to give birth in their cars, in the streets, and often the baby and also the mother didn't make it. It's just it's a horrible state. Okay. take a toilet break. And then I reply to some more letters. And maybe I'll continue chapter 4. I still want to read some more. Thank you. Wilt. Women wife. What a weird sentence, but you know what? At least he's writing something. This is always a good thing. What is quite cute. Oh. That's my answer for that. Oh, there it is. Forgot I skipped chapter 3. So I was proud of the case for reparations because it did rely on instinct but was a synthesis of facts. It was crafted in the mold of the mostly white magazine writers I admire. They were courageous reporters and masters at taking in many streams of that reporting and turning it into a coherent and gripping narrative. Quite a few of them wrote about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and from their writing I derived a sense that comprehension of conflict was a matter of knowledge, not morality. And that knowledge was as foreign to me as computational mathematics. To that was added my steady diet of beat reports, Sunday talk shows, and loose conversation, all of which validated the apparent complexity of the conflict. But even amid that complexity, there was a certain incontestable narrative punctuated by platitudes that assumed an air of indisputable truth. Israel was a Jewish democracy, indeed the only democracy in the Middle East, one with both the right to exist and the right to defend itself. I had staked my writing largely against exactly these sort of easy bromides and national fictions, and I'd been richly rewarded and well honored for that work. But the year I wrote the case for reparation was the same year I applied for my first adult passport. My work was as local as it was lauded, and somewhere in my mind I was still a college dropout. Still, Nehisi was restless today, written in lipstick red. I felt a great hand of luck in my life, and I was now miraculously surrounded by people who knew real things about the world. Journalists who had covered civil wars and had been evacuated from war zones and knew the correct use of words like internecines and sectarian. I felt my deep ignorance of the world beyond America's border, and with that, a deep shame. But passport stamps and wide vocabularies are neither wisdom nor morality. As it happens, you can see the world and still never see the people in it. Empires are founded by travelers, and the claim of some exclusive knowledge of the native is their not. I always imagined reparation as a rejection of plunder at large, and who in modern memory had been plundered more than the victim of the Holocaust. But my prototype was not reparation from a genocidal empire with Jewish victims, but from that empire to a Jewish state. And what my young eyes now saw of that state was a world where separate and unequal was alive and well, where rule was the ballot of some for some, and the bullet for others was policy. I was seeking a world beyond plunder, but my proof of concept was just more plunder. Halfway through my trip, I joined my group of writers for a hike up to the top of a hill just outside of Ramallah. The sun blazed above while briars attacked from below, but whatever the assault of nature, I was relieved to feel myself beyond the walls, strictures, and the vices of humans. Our destination was Sakia, an ecological retreat where a collective of Palestinians were reimagining their relationship with this precious land, which certain forces seem determined to rip right out from under them. And it is precious. Two of the houses here are from the Ottoman period and the British Mandate, respectively, and there is a sign dating back to the 12th century. In 1937, the sign was purchased from a farming family by Daoud Saladino, a Palestinian artist and educator. Saladino would host his family here for 3 months in the summer and drew inspiration from the site vistas. In one of his paintings, his young son Ibrahim is seated in a red toy car, looking out placidly, a fervent garden blooming in the background. Contemplating this work, the art historian John Halaka wondered, why does this unassuming painting feel like a ghost haunting me? In 1948, as Palestinians were being driven from their land, Saladino sheltered his family on his estate, and then in 1967, Saladino too was driven out by Israeli forces. He and his family were banned from returning, except for their visit. Saladino died in 2001. Our guide through the history and landscape of the site was Sahar Khawazmi, the architect and co-founder of Sakia, with her partner, the filmmaker Nehisi Shinokrot. Sahar was born in Kuwait, but her family is from Palestine, Ramallah, Hebron, Jordan. During the Second Intifada, as Palestinians battled Israeli occupation and cities like Hebron became combat zone, the Israeli Defense Force expanded its network of checkpoints and enforced a curfew. Feeling imprisoned, Sahar, then a student at nearby Berzed University, began exploring the hills around Ramallah with friends. During one of those walks, Sahar found the Salatimo estate, which had not been lived in since 1967, though the property was still in the family. There was trash everywhere. Vandals had ripped off the property in search of valuables. Nature had taken over, and there were trees growing through the floors. Nonetheless, there was a magic about it, Sahar told me later. Maybe it was the house built on a hill overlooking a valley. Maybe it was that the site couldn't be reached by car, and every journey had the feel of a pilgrimage. Maybe it was the sheer vintage of the site. Archaeological evidence dates back through the time of the Crusaders, the Romans, and the Canaanites. Or maybe it was the water, a natural spring still in its traditional form. Whatever it was, it left Sahar with a feeling of holiness. She and Ida founded Sakia in 2016, and they have been trying to preserve that holiness ever since. The effort was constant. We stopped halfway through the hill and beheld a Greek strawberry tree, its great brownish red branches spraying out like a hydra's head. It was magnificent, and for a moment we just stared at this beautiful thing. Then Sahar directed our attention to the cliffs carved in its trunk, the calling card of a local Israeli militia. Sahar explained that these militiamen come as the feeling strikes them, vandalizing the land they believe to be their homeland given to them by God. One night, Sahar and Nida were awakened by noises. They thought it might be a group of kids, but then the noises got louder, and when they were outside, they saw that their house was surrounded by 20 or so settlers. The settlers ran when they saw Nida, but they had already done their work. Tools had been stolen, an oven destroyed, fish killed. Later, when I asked Sahar how she and Nida lived with this constant threat to property and safety, she said, It is a precarious life. At the same time, there is a strong will to stay and keep working. There are communities whose villages are destroyed 80 times and they come back. It becomes part of how you live. It's a mode of survival. This is how you live on the land. We will keep going back, building the things they keep destroying. We walked on until we had completed our own pilgrimage and reached the top of a hill. The sky was wide open, with wisps of cloud floating by. A herd of goats slowly made its way past us, and we watched as a worker trained his attention on one particular goat lying on the ground. It was in labor. The group of my fellow writers circled the goat at a respectful distance and watched in amazement as the worker midwife two kids slathered in the yellow goo of new life. Slightly amazed, we walked inside one of the buildings, where I broke away and wandered off on my own. I found myself in a bedroom where I had been told artists are sometimes welcome to spend a residency. I sat on a fold-out couch and for 10 minutes conducted a residency of my own. Outside, I heard the goat bleating and my comrades in conversation. I talked back to our tour of Lid, a city inside the border of Israel where in 1948, the National Israel Defense Force massacred a group of Palestinians by other means, tossing grenades into a mosque. Our guide there, Umar al-Gubari, was concerned with the story of the massacre and was also interested that it ran counter to Israel's own noble creation myth. The import of this counter-narrative of Palestinian vindicationism became clear once we reached the site of the massacre. We stood on a traffic island across from the mosque as our guide narrated the events, citing the words of the Israeli soldiers themselves. I looked over and saw an Israeli man in dark glasses standing up to the side of our little group. I knew he was Israeli only because of how he glared at our guide as he recited the history of the site. At first, I had the same semi-shock reaction I had back home when those in power so violently objected to words. There's a book named The White Fragility, which talks about the fragility of white people when talking about the history of racism in America or the current ongoing systematic racism in America. And it's a really good book in the way that it doesn't just reflect American, but it reflects on people with racial biases that they have not taken care of. A lot of them feel uncomfortable when those racism biases is confronted by people who call out, who see them. It's a good book. Umar did not have any guns or knives, and he was standing on land firmly under Israel's rule. Nevertheless, Umar presented a threat, the threat of the storyteller who can, through words, erode the claims of the powerful. Every single empire in its official discourse has said that it is not like all the others. Writes Edward Said, the writer of Orientalism, the one that I've read on stream partially because it's a much larger book. And also, I've released the video for the book, so go watch that if you haven't. It's a really good book. That its circumstances are special, that it has a mission to enlighten, civilize, bring order and democracy, and that it uses forces only as a last resort. And sadder still, there always is a chorus of willing intellectuals to say calming words about benign or altruistic empires, as if one shouldn't trust the evidence of one's eyes to watching the destruction and the misery and death brought by the latter mission civilis. Within days of publishing the case for reparations, I began to feel the mistake, but it took years for the depth of that mistake, and thus my own depth to compound. I felt it acutely atop that hill, and the mistake was far deeper than merely selecting the wrong model. My case for reparation was built on the chain of cases stretching back through James Forman, Queen Mother Moore, and Kelly House, all the way back to Belinda Royal at the very founding of the United States. In this sense, the case was not even mine, it was ancestral, and its target was one of the world's most malevolent inventions, racialized slavery and everything that flowed from it. Ancestors are important to me. They live on for me, not as ghosts, but through words. Very often, before I sit down to write, I read back through those words, through slave narratives, letters from freed men, memories, or poems. I read the words aloud like an incantation. Dear Dangerfield, you cannot imagine how much I want to see you. Come as soon as you can. I had a constant dread that Mrs. Moore, her mistress, would be in want of money and sell my dear wife. I would much rather you would get married to some good man, but every time I get a letter from you, it tears me all to pieces. And I feel a portion of what they felt, a portion of their love, rage, hope, despair, and that portion is the power I try to convey in my own writing. I am not alone, I am in a tradition. All that week I listened to Palestinians invoking the television, invoking James Baldwin, Ameriki Baraka, or Angela Davis, explaining how these writers and activists revealed something of their own struggle to them. And then each night, the festival guests gathered for a reading or a talk with local Palestinian writers and intellectuals. One night, I sat in the audience and was shocked to see a Palestinian writer named Bekriah Mawasi quote one of my books on a panel. In that moment, I felt the warmth of solidarity, of concord peoples, as one of my comrades put it, finding each other across the chasm of ocean and experience. But as warm as that felt, I also knew that in meeting across the chasm, one of us had reached further than the other. I am a writer and a bearer of a tradition, a writer and a steward. And what I felt sitting there on top of that hill, in the residency with myself, was that if my writing has soared, my stewardship has faltered. The next morning I left the festival and made my way from Ramallah to Jerusalem. I had to wait an extra hour or so for a taxi with the right colored license plate, yellow, and so be allowed to cross to a checkpoint in Israel wall and onto the road to Jerusalem on the other side. I made small talk with my driver, then rotated back on my thoughts of the journey so far. was my 6th day in Palestine, but I felt like I have been here for months. The days were filled with thoughts, the nights with thoughts. Even the meals felt like seminars. Some of this is just being abroad somewhere far from home, but most of it was the specificity of this place. How much it seemed to embody the West and its contradictions, its claims of democracy, its foundation in exploitation. Of all the worlds I have ever explored, I don't think any shone so bright, so intense, so immediately as Palestine. But when the light cleared, I had new eyes, and I could see my own worlds in new ways, and the world from which they were derived, the stories, columns, speeches, and talks presented by willing intellectuals, so much seemed obvious. I now noted a symmetry in the Bromides, that those who claim Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East were just as likely to claim that America was the oldest democracy in the world. And both claims relied on excluding whole swath of population living under the rule of the state. Riding in the taxi toward Jerusalem, the truth of this struck me as undeniable. I had spent most of my time in the occupied territories, a world of minority rule, but even in the state proper, chaos reigned. Palestinians living in Israel have shorter life, are poorer, and live in more violent neighborhoods. Certain neighborhoods in Israel are allowed to discriminate legally against Palestinian citizens by setting admission committees. The committees, operating in 41% of all Israeli localities, are free to bar anyone lacking social suitability or compatibility with the social and cultural fabric. Openly racist appeal are the norm, as when Benjamin Netanyahu warned in 2015 that right-wing government is in danger, Arab voters are heading to the polling stations in droves. For all my talk of being fooled by the language of Jewish democracy, it had been right there the whole time. The phrase means what it says, a democracy for the Jewish people and the Jewish people alone. The two-state solution that Israel and pro-Israel people has championed is a lie, because they will never allow two-state solution. But they are also afraid of the one-state solution, one-state nation, because if it's one-state nation where the Palestinians can go back home and have human rights there, education and everything, even though more Palestinian by percentage and by numbers are more literate than the Israelis, but that's another topic. What do I want to say? The one-state solution, they're afraid of the one-state solution because Jews is still a race of minority in the world, in the scale of the world. And Palestinians is, by the number, is still there are still more Palestinians than Jews in Israel. That's why they are right now busy trying to kill more of them. And when they said Hamas, they lied. They want to kill more Palestinians so that there are less Palestinians than the Israel. So the Jews in Israel can felt more safe in their throne, because if they do want to make it a true democracy where everyone can vote, then they also want to make it so that only Jews will be voted in the government as a real government. The Palestinian in West Bank that is in the government are mostly just there as puppets, because as we see from the cases from a few months ago, some of the Palestinians that is in government in West Bank can be so easily fired from their job if they said anything that is critical to Israel. So any slight criticism can get you fired if you're working in the government in Israel as Palestinian. And also your voice doesn't really matter, because there's not that much of you. And you can also see this from how the Palestinians in West Bank cannot build anything right now. There is no permit given to them to build anything, water, electricity, anything, even houses. That shows you how powerless the Palestinian that is allowed in being in the government in Israel. Just some side notes. If the language I'd heard all my professional life had been wrong, had been deceptive even, then what was the language to describe the project I now saw? It's true that Jim Crow was the first thing that came to mind, if only because Jim Crow is a phrase that connotes an injustice, a sorting of human beings, the awarding and stripping of the rights of a population. Certainly, that was some part of what I saw in Hebron, in Jerusalem, in Lit. But it was not just the literal meaning of Jim Crow, it was the feeling of the thing too. I saw the word Jim Crow and a casket opens before me, and inside is a boy beaten out of his own humanity. That's Emmett Till. I say Jim Crow and I see the flag of slavery waving above a state capitol. That's the Confederate flag. I saw Jim Crow and I see men on a balcony of the Lorraine Motel pointing toward the shot. I think that's MLK, but they're still contented because that shooting is weird. I say Jim Crow and Detroit Red turns to me and asks, "Who taught you to hate?" I say Jim Crow and I hear Paul text, redlining, grandfather clause, whites only, and each of these phrases conjures additional images too. But Jim Crow was the language of analogy, of translation, not the thing itself. As much as anything, my mission in Palestine was to grow new roots, to describe this new world, not as a satellite of my old world, but as a world in and of itself. I stopped in Jerusalem just long enough to check into my hotel. I allowed myself in a very nice room, one with soft sheets and a bathtub. I would pay for this self-indulgence, but not yet. I had 5 more days of work, and whereas for the first 5 days I had comrades who were having their own set of revelations, now I was alone. Part of me would have done anything to go home. I was familiar with that part. It was the part that always grosses about the rigors of reporting, the awkwardness of asking strangers intimate questions, the discipline of listening intently. The voices is not only in my head, but it was louder in Palestine. The days were longer and the revelations more intense. I remember walking up an inclining street in Hebron and reaching a large metal face with a revolving gate. At the top of the gate was a device about the size of a shoebox with a tube protruding from it. It looked like a camera. In fact, it was a turret designed to lock on and immobilize a target using non-lethal rounds fired via remote control. The device's name was Smart Shooter, was written on the side. This was Operation Avant-Garde, the first initial steps to automated imperial dominance, and I had little reason to feel that such trailblazing efforts would remain in Palestine, and at that, I despaired. I was away for 10 days. 10 days in this holy land of barbed wire, settlers, and outrageous guns. And every day I was there, I had a moment of profound despair. I truly wanted to look away, to go home and mumble some words about what I had seen in private. And maybe if I were left alone to my own devices, maybe if I were loyal only to myself, I would have done it. But I am a writer and a bearer. I am a writer and a steward. I am not alone, and I don't just mean a jester, but the people I met every day living in abeyance of Israeli rule. And I was not done. I took the elevator down to the lobby, where I met Avner Guvariyahu, who leads breaking the silence. That documentary. A group of former IDF soldiers who now oppose the occupation. We walk out. Oh no, that's breaking the silence. Not the other thing. The other thing is, I forgot the one that lied about the rapes happening in the 2nd October. Breaking the silence is, from the former IDF soldier who now opposed the occupation. They talk a lot about the practice of. It's actually a very good documentary, Breaking the Silence. They talk about why they were put to jail if they refused to, do the things that all Israeli need to do, which is illegally harassing the Palestinian, and some of them even kidnap and taken people's houses. A lot of this was because a lot of the IDF members or the IOF members more specifically, are young, very young, and very dumb. A lot of them then posted their war crimes in social media, like straight up just posting war crimes in social media, and then think it's okay for them to do that because they've been told their whole life that it's okay to do that. And a lot of them, when confronted, and become violent because of the white fragility that I mentioned a few moments ago, We walk outside where an old pickup truck idled in front of the hotel. The driver, Guy Batavia, wore a baseball cap and thick glasses. We exchanged greetings and then I slid into the truck and we drove off. My house were both Israeli, as nearly all my guests would be for the second half of my trip. This was a conscious decision. What it was not was an empty declaration to hear both sides. I had no interest in the plans of the occupation and what struck me then as segregation. Journalists claim to be hearing both sides as though binary opposition had been set down by some disinterested God. But it is the journalists themselves who are playing God. It is the journalists who decide which sides are legitimate and which are not. Read Edward Said Orientalism and also watch my video on it. Okay. Which views shall be considered and which pushed out of the frame. And this power is an extension of the power of other curators of the culture. Network execs, producer, publisher, whose core job is deciding which stories get told and which do not. When you are erased from the argument and purged from the narrative, you do not exist. Thus the complex of curators is doing more than setting pub dates and green lighting. They are establishing and monitoring a criterion for humanity. Without this criterion, there can be no oppressive power. Because the first duty of racism, sexism, homophobia, and so forth is the framing of who is human and who is not. But there is space beyond the brackets. For me, it is a world of emerge and evening exchange, of barbershop and Baltimore Frost, a land where The Last Dragon is a classic teen movies and Lake Trout is heritage. What I have always wanted is to expand the frame of humanity, to shift the brackets of images and ideas, so that in thinking about my trip and setting my sights upon the wheel, my frame excluded any defense of the patently immoral, and I would sooner hear a defense of cannibalism than I would hear any brief for what I saw with my own eyes in Hebron. We drove from the hotel until we reached Highway 60, the Way of the Patriots, an ancient road said to have been traveled by the biblical prophets all the way south to Hebron. For much of this leg, Guy was silent as Avner described his time in the Israeli Defense Force as enforcing the occupation. I now hear this word, occupation, In the same way, I might hear a middle-aged man speak of his medical procedure when what he means is colonoscopy. The constant threat of violence, the stories I've heard, might then did not seem fit for something as clinical as an occupation. But Avner did not release euphemism and more than occupation. He spoke of his tool, arrests, checkpoints, intelligence files, home invasion. He said, "Every house in the occupied territories has a number. The number gives you basic intel on the people inside the house. If the people inside the house are somehow involved in any resistance, if someone in the family was imprisoned, if anyone was even blacklisted, that's a house you will not take, because then you're risking your troops. So you enter houses of people you know in advance are innocent. Well, now we never called Palestinian innocent. They were always involved or not involved because no one's innocent. You go into a house of that family and you basically use that house as your own as a military post. It's elevated, it's protected, but it's also sort of the eye in the sky for the soldiers on the ground. There is no privacy. There's obviously no warrant. You don't need to ask in advance. You don't call in advance. You don't send an email. You just barge in and usually handcuff and blindfold the head of the family. If there's a teenager who looks at you the wrong way, or an uncle who looks big enough that he could threaten you, you do the same. You disconnect the phone, close the curtains, so they won't tell anyone that you're there with them, and they sit inside scared, petrified with their heads down. This struck me as something out of a horror movie. A family held hostage not for ransom, but as a show of the kind of dominance that is essential to Israeli rule. When the two-state solution seemed at hand, the talk was that Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank would be the territorial basis of a Palestinian state. The West Bank was subsequently divided into three zones: Area C, where Palestinians governed the civil authorities and enforced the law; Area B, which was to be governed jointly; and Area C, which would remain under Israeli control. This all sounds civilized enough, but that notion could not survive contact with the map. Area A holds most of the West Bank population, but the entire zone is effectively an archipelago, filled with densely populated villages and urban centers, and more resembles an inkblot test than the basic of state. Area B is tiny and mostly rings the outskirts of towns. Area C, where Israeli power is complete, constitutes the only contiguous territory and the majority of the land, including the mineral-rich Jordan Valley. These decisions are more of shading than of bright lines. The fact is that the West Bank is occupied, meaning Israel exercises its will wherever it chooses. The tools of control are diverse. Drones and observation towers surveil from above, earth mounts and trenches block the road below, gates enclose, checkpoint inspect, nothing is predictable. A road that was free yesterday is now suddenly impeded by a flying checkpoint, a mobile gate and a squad of soldiers requesting permits and papers. But the randomness is intentional. The point is to make Palestinians feel the hand of occupation constantly. In Israel, in East Jerusalem, Area B, Area A, B, or C is not just we're here and you're there, Avner told me, describing the relationship between the IDF and Palestinians in every jurisdiction. It's we're here and we're there. In this way, a people is sundered from itself, and all communal bonds are eroded. The cousin who was once just down the road is walled off. What was once in living memory, a long walk to court, potential wife in another village, is transformed into an impossible obstacle course. And this is built upon the sundering that began in 1948. The sectioning of Palestinians in Israel proper from those in East Jerusalem, and those in East Jerusalem from those in the West Bank, and those in the West Bank from those in Gaza, and those in Gaza from the world. He said, I remember this one mission I was in. Go in, take control, the whole procedure. We're in the window doing what we are supposed to do, looking out the window. And then one of my soldiers, I was a sergeant, so one of my soldiers sort of calls up and says, Hey, come quickly, I need your help. And I got there, and the situation was a father standing with his daughter in his own home, trying to take her to the bathroom. And my soldier was standing there with his gun cocked in the face of the father, and his daughter is standing there between his legs, petrified. When I got there, she had already peed in her pants. That was sort of one of those moments where I was like, what the fuck are we doing? Who is this for? Writing all of this now cast the illusion that I understood how the pieces of knowledge connected. Afner's stories, the Byzantine lines of occupation, the bromides, the articles, but they came together in moments. Sometimes I would be riding past a checkpoint and look out and to my shock, see a young soldier with his rifle pointed at the road, which is to say at me, as soon as I would see this, I would search for a good reason, a justification. But eventually I started to realize that there never was one. Even as I listened to Afner talk, even as we speed easily and unimpeded down roads that Palestinians on the West Bank cannot use, part of me was still searching. I did this because the weight of evil is so clear. I did this because if the worst was true, if I was forced to see it square, then I knew what must come next. I did this because a good reason is also a way out. The weakness in me is always talking, but so are my ancestors. We turned off Route 60 into the Israeli settlement of Kiryat Arba. A guard who seemed to be of East Asian descent held us at the checkpoint for a moment. Afner handed him his ID and they talked in Hebrew. Then the guard let us in. Guy parked the truck and I followed Afner into Kahane Park, a small garden named for Meir Kahane, the Jewish supremacist who, as leader of the Kahanist movement and a member of Nehisi, promoted the permanent annexation of the West Bank and Gaza and the enslavement of Palestinians. The Kahanist movement is also consists of Nakba denialism, and if you see someone denying that the Nakba happened or trying to insert anything that is maybe to compare the Nakba to other events, is Kahanism, it is Jewish supremacy, it is racist, and you should call them as racist. Kahane's political party was banned by the government in 1985 and he was assassinated in New York in 1990, but his disciple Baruch Goldstein took up his mantle. 4 years after Kahane's death, Goldstein entered the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron and gunned down 29 Muslims while they were worshipping. One of the Ministry of Defense, the head of the Ministry of Defense, or used to be Ministry of Defense, I think Ministry of Defense, I forgot the real question, but one of the higher ups in the government used to put the photos of Baruch Goldstein in his room, and he only took it down once he was in office. In the park, we stopped to look at a small cylindrical memorial to Kahane and then walked a few paces more until we reached a massive stone slab raised just above the ground. It was the tomb of Baruch Goldstein, and across its top were 20 or so small stones. Afner explained that this grave is a kind of shrine, regularly visited by those who see Goldstein as a martyr. Kahane and Goldstein were both official pariah. Kahane was shot in Manhattan, and Goldstein's mass murder was condemned by the Israeli government. But whatever one wishes to make of the official denunciation of Kahane and Goldstein, I was standing in a park bearing Kahane's name in which he and his massive mass murdering acolyte were memorialized. A park that rested in a settlement sanctioned and subsidized by the state that plans to denounce him. Goldstein's rampage was stopped by the Palestinian worshippers themselves, who rose up, disarmed him, and beat him to death. In the wake of the street protests that exploded in the city, Israel segregated the street of Hebron and set curfew for its Palestinian residents. To this very day, the legacy of that crackdown endures, which makes Israel reason why they built the wall when they said that it is to keep them safe from the Palestinians. Is of course a lie, because again, every accusation is a confession, and the reason why the segregation got worse was because a Jewish extremist gunned down people in a mosque. It's like that dude would go into a church and then gun down everyone in the church while still worshipping God. You don't build a park to worship him there. unless your state is a crazy state filled with racist extremists. Walking the street of Hebron as I had seen the shattered storefront and the soldiers patrolling the street, it was hard to avoid the feeling that Palestine had won, and this feeling held true for me across the West Bank, where the pace of colonization and settlement had expanded, not declined, since the 1994 massacre. In 1993, when the Oslo Peace Accord was signed, the settler population was 111,000. Today is 500,000. Goldstein and the subsequent Israeli reaction to Palestinian unrest in Hebron are manifestations of an uncomfortable reality. This putative Jewish democracy is, like its American veteran, an expansionist power. Zionism demand, as Levi Eshkol, Prime Minister of Israel during 1960, once put it, the dowry, not the bread. That is to say, the land without the Palestinians on it. And every expansionist power needs a good story to justify its plunder. Better connections formed in my mind between the Israel operation and American segregation. The Israelis version did not make the case for itself in the language of Jim Crow, but in the dialect of liberal expansionism, with descriptions of barbaric natives and the promises of the great improvement of the savages by their betters. The father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, who is atheist by the way, first considered Argentina, believing that it would be in that sparsely populated country highest interest to cede us a portion of its territory. When Herzl turned to Palestine, he viewed Palestinians, as historian Benny Morris puts it, as little more than part of the scenery. The scenery was savage. We should form a portion of rampart of Europe against Asia, Herzl wrote in his 1896 manifesto, The Jewish State, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. A year earlier, Herzl claimed in a diary entry that Zionism will ultimately benefit those whose land he sought to occupy. Further, it goes without saying that those who sought to raise the banner of civilization would still respectfully tolerate persons of other faiths and protect their property, their honor, and their freedom. Such protection would set for the entire world a wonderful example. But this benevolent spirit was undercut by the marching order Herzl offered in that same entry. We must expropriate gently the private property on the estates assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it any employment in our own country. The property owners will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. Herzl writing fits well within Said's official discourse of empire, where expropriation and punishment are presented as a species of altruism and tolerance. Herzl died in 1904, but by then what he called a gigantic dream had assumed a force of its own, and some of his most influential followers thought it better to dispense with the vocabulary of liberal conquest and speak plainly. In his 1923 essay, The Iron Wall Zionist Theory, Zev Jabotinsky wrote that the Jewish colonists who imagined that the Arab race would voluntarily consent to the realization of Zionism was exhibiting condescending contempt, better to name the thing flat out. My reader have a general idea of the history of colonization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all the precedents with which they are acquainted and see whether there is one solitary instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. It's worth lingering on Jabotinsky's invocation of colonization. Modern Zionists recording horror at any association between their ideology and colonialism. They claim the land of Israel as their homeland, and from their assert was that no people can colonize their own home. This formulation evinces at best a deep ignorance of the history of Israel's patron state. In 1816, a group of white elites decided that in the matter of black people, ethnic cleansing would be preferred to enslavement. The American Colonization Society was formed with the explicit goal of shipping as many blacks as possible back to their national home, Africa. The ICS garnered some support in black communities, terrorized by racist whites much as the Jews of Europe were terrorized by anti-Semitic Europeans. And much as Jewish Zionists saw themselves bringing the boon of civilization to Palestine, Black American colonizer of Africa believed they would do the same. Thus, Liberia was born, and plagued, for much of its history, by its colonial past. As for anti-colonial Zionism, if such a thing could be spoken of, it would come as a shock to the ideology founders. The land of our fathers is waiting for us. Let us colonize it, wrote Eliezer ben Yehuda, linguist and godfather of modern Hebrew. In 1880s, and by becoming its master, we shall again be a people like all others. This mastery of the land means economic control. Zionist Ber Borochov urged Jews to consume the leading position in the economy of the new land. In 1906, and in this way, Jewish immigration may be diverted to colonialization of the underdeveloped country. And mastery also meant violence. While many Zionists spoke of peaceful accord between their aims and the aim of Palestinians, Jabotinsky never allowed himself the liberty of such euphemism. There is no such precedent. The native populations, civilized or uncivilized, has always stubbornly resisted the colonists, irrespective of whether they were civilized or savage. But the native population was savage, and Jabotinsky saw a clear difference between the Jewish colonizer and the Arabs to be colonized. Culturally, they are 500 years behind us, wrote Jabotinsky. They have neither our endurance nor our determination. The early Zionists may have considered the land of Palestine as their rightful homeland, but they never imagined themselves as the natives. Natives in colonial discourse were savages with no capacity to improve the land and thus no right to it. In 1943, as Zionist terrorist groups led an insurgency against British rule, their commander and the future Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, learned that one of their soldiers has been flogged by the British. Jews are not Zulus, wrote Begin. We will not whip Jews in their homeland. Begin delineation separating Jewish redeemers from the uncivilized natives was reinforced by the West. In 1946, a British-American alliance dispatched an Anglo-American committee of inquiry to decide upon the fate of mandatory Palestine, as well as its 600,000 Jews and 1.1 million non-Jews. In Java, the delegates wrote of an overgrown Arab village filled with squalor and a population diseased and beaten by life. But in Jewish Tel Aviv, they marveled at the thoroughly civilized community with its tree-shaded boulevard with opera and theaters, with playground and modern school, with buses and abandoned houses. Zionism would free the Arab race from the veil, the fast, the sickness, the filth, the lack of education. This narrative of a barbaric Palestine plagued by filth and chaos are contrasted with an ostensibly pristine and orderly West has never faded. In 2013, Israeli journalist Ari Shavit published My Promised Land, a best-selling apology for Zionism in which he tracks his great-grandfather's 1897 voyage into mandatory Palestine. In Shavit's telling, his ancestors arrived into the chaos of Arab Java. This is a city of squalor, of hanging animal carcasses, the smelly fish, the rotting vegetables, and the infected eyes of the village woman. One where Shavit's ancestor is forced to contend with the hustling, the noise, the filth. Java is not unique. In Jerusalem, this ancestor is faced with the misery of the Orient, dark, crooked alleyways, filthy markets, hungry masses. This is an amazing account, if only because Shavit's ancestor was coming from London, a city so notoriously filthy that it was nicknamed the Great Smoke. In his book Dirty Old London, Lee Jackson sketches the city. Thoroughfares were swarmed with black mud, composed principally of horse dung, forming a tenacious, glutinous paste. The air was peppered with soot, flakes of filth tumbling to the ground in black plutonian showers. The distinctive smell of the city was equally unappealing. Winter fogs brought hepatic sulfurous stinks. The summer months, on the other hand, created their own obnoxious cocktail. The combined odor of stale fruit and vegetables, rotten eggs, fall tobacco, spilled beer, rank car grease, dried soot, smoke, triturated road dust, and damp straw. London was the heart of the greatest empire ever known, a financial and mercantile hub for the world, but it was also infamously filthy. Okay. I started to starting to lose my concentration, my voice. It's getting harder to read the letters, not just voice them, but actually read them. That's why I keep reading the drawing. I keep mispronouncing words and misreading them. I'm gonna need to stop now. There's still more to chapter 4, and I don't think I will read it in the... I don't think I will do another stream to read them. I also skip chapter 3 after all. But it's only 4 chapters, and the 4th chapter is the longest. What I've read currently is at a stage where he is starting to describe Orientalism, which is, as I mentioned multiple times in the stream, is a book written by Palestinian American Edward Said, who have lived in Palestine, moved and was escaped to Egypt, I guess, the word that fit more to his life. And then he went to America to study, either America or British, I forgot. And then he was there that he got his master degree and everything, and started writing books about politics. One of the books he wrote that I kept mentioning is Orientalism, and it's also his only book that I've read, unfortunately. But it gave a description on why the West view Orientalism as below them, as a justification for a lot of things. For example, one of the history event that is often forgotten is how British, because drug opium was banned to be sold in Britain then tried to sell it to China, even by using illegal means, because the government there also refused to sell. The government in China at the time also refused of the selling of opium in their country. But because Britain see themselves as more than the Asian people, the Chinese people, they ignored them and they kept selling the opium, causing heavy damages to the people there. Some of those damages is still mostly untold because it's just never told, mostly, for the most part. If there's any book about that, I would love to read it. But yeah, that's the practice of Orientalism. It affected mostly the global South, because the West placed themselves as the superior one, the Occidental, and placed the others as the Orient, the inferior savages. That's how they justify slavery, that's how they justify colonialism. It's a lot of justification that for doing horrible stuff. Because even back then, I know a lot of people keep saying that it was a different time. No, it's not. It's just the justification was accepted at the time, unfortunately, as it was so normalized. And they needed just those justification because the people are already aware that colonization and those other stuffs are not things that good people do. I mean, even a kid who heard the history, some of the streamer from Britain, when they heard the history of how the UK sell opium to China, they didn't see it as something that a good guy would do, because it's not. Yeah, that's tiny easy codes. Let's reply to some more letters and then I'll end the stream. Because I do still need to work tomorrow. I may also need to get some food in me. Too tired and too hungry. one gracias también. really need to rest. Finishing the chain echoes back to back. Also with full day jobs is really taxing. And speaking of full day jobs, I have another one tomorrow because it's a 9 to 5 job, so you know. I'll try to finish the message either tonight. I don't think I can do this tonight. It's already 10. I don't think I will be able to do it tonight. But I can definitely finish it tomorrow because there's not much left. There's only like 50, 100 pages. And it's not like there's so much words in between pages. Let me just show you guys. See? Those are big fonts. For non-fiction, these are really big fonts. So, I don't need to do too much reading to finish the job, to finish the book. And it's also very well written, so it's easier to go through it. I really highly recommend it if you're interested in it. And with that said, that's it for today's stream for me. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I don't think tomorrow. I need to rest.